just as we're heading up to Easter, most of us, if we've read the Gospels, we are familiar with the events that led up to that first Easter. For example, we're familiar with the triumphal entry that took place on Palm Sunday, where the crowds lined the streets with the palm branches and said, "Hosanna, Hosanna," which means basically, "Save us now." We love that story. We're familiar with the story of Jesus in John chapter 13, gathering the disciples in the upper room, where he gave them what we know as the upper room discourse, but it's where he took the bread and the cup and he shared it with them for the first time. It's where he washed their feet. We're familiar with that event. We're familiar with the Garden of Gethsemane and the agony that Jesus endured as he prayed to the Father, "Let this cup pass from me. However, not my will, but your will be done." By the way, let me just tell you, the cup wasn't the agony of being crucified. It wasn't the physical torture that he was going to face. It was that Jesus knew at some point while he was hanging on the cross, the Father was going to place on his shoulders the sin and the weight of the sin of all the world. But that wasn't even what was bothering him. He knew at that point the Father was going to have to look away from him. And he knew they had never had anything but this perfect relationship, and he was dreading that moment. And so he said, if there's a plan B, could we consider it? However, not my will, your will be done. We're familiar with Peter, right? Remember the young girl who saw him and said, "You're one of his followers?" He said, "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." Blankety, blank, blank, blank. It said he cursed. And she said, "Well, you must not be," right? But you must, because I don't think you talk like that, right? But we're familiar with these events. But this is what's interesting. There are some interesting subplots that were also unfolding leading up to the crucifixion and resurrection that we're not quite as familiar with. So this week and next weekend, I want to look into the lives of a couple of individuals that were involved in these subplots. And what's interesting is this. From their perspective, these guys thought that they were preventing what God wanted to accomplish. But in trying to prevent what God wanted to accomplish, they actually ended up being a part of the plan. And I think we're going to see as we look in the stories of these guys that when God puts a plan in motion, it's unstoppable. If God has a plan for your life, do whatever you want to do, you can't resist God's plan. And I think deep down inside we know that, but if we're honest, most of us would struggle with the temptation in life to try and resist God's plan for our life, what God wants to do in our lives. And we know it probably isn't going to work, but we do it anyway. It just seems like in the heat of the moment, it's the right thing to do, to try and resist God. For example, sometimes I think we try to resist God because we don't want to really give him total control of our lives. So we kind of try to keep him at arm's length. I think sometimes we resist God because we're afraid that he's going to mess with a certain area of our life. Maybe there's a relationship we're involved in that we know we shouldn't be involved in, and we're afraid if God gets too close, he's going to mess with that relationship. Or maybe there's a habit we have in our life and we just aren't ready to give it up, so we resist God because we don't want him to mess with that habit. Maybe it has to do with our finances. I mean, for some people, the last thing they want God dabbling around in and sticking his nose in is to their finances. I think sometimes we resist God because we're mad at him. It's almost like, you know what, I'm upset with you, I'm not going to cooperate right now. And often we're mad at God because he didn't do something in our lives that we thought he should do. For example, maybe there was someone who was close to us and they were sick and we were praying that God would heal them and God didn't heal them. And so we're mad at God. Or maybe we wanted him to change something. I just recently went through this. There was something I was praying that God would move in the hearts of some individuals and it would change something that would impact my life significantly, but he didn't change it. And when that happens, often we're like, well, God, you could have. You could have changed things. You could have healed my loved one if you'd have chosen to, but since you didn't, I'm kind of mad at you. And I think most of us struggle with that from time to time. So over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at two individuals. As I said, they played a key role in the overall story. And these individuals, as you're going to see, for their own reason, they made the choice to try and resist God. And as we talk through their stories and we hear their stories, you're going to be thinking this: how stupid can you be? Can't you see what's about to happen? It's so obvious, but this is what I want you to understand as we get into it this weekend. The two individuals that we're going to look at, the one we're going to look at this weekend and the one we're going to look at next weekend, there's a little bit of these individuals in all of us. I know that it's true in my life. Now, we're going to begin by looking at a man named Caiaphas. You've probably heard of Caiaphas, but let me give you just a little bit of background about Caiaphas. Caiaphas was the most powerful man in Israel at this time in the first century. And let me give you several reasons he was so powerful. First of all, he was powerful because of his position. Caiaphas was the high priest of Israel. That means that he was the one Jewish person who could once a year go into the Holy of Holies, which was the most sacred place on the earth. The Holy of Holies was that place in the temple behind the veil where they kept the Ark of the Covenant. Why was that significant? Because that's where the presence of God resided. And once a year, Caiaphas could go in, he would make a sacrifice, and he would ask forgiveness for the nation of Israel. That means that at that one day, he got closer to God, to the presence of God, than any other person on this earth. That's pretty significant. But he was also powerful because he was the president of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was made up of 70 Jewish scholars and leaders, but it was kind of like the Supreme Court of the Jews. He was the president of that, so that kind of made him the civil leader of the Jews. But he was also powerful because he had been appointed by Rome to represent the Jewish nation to the Roman Empire. And so when you think about Caiaphas, he was kind of the go-between between Israel and Rome. Remember, they were living in an occupied territory. They were living under Roman rule. And so Caiaphas, he was the go-between. He was the peacemaker. He was the ultimate negotiator. He's also the kind of guy you didn't cross. You see, Caiaphas was one of those individuals, and we know people like this in life. They got their way because they demanded their way. So that's Caiaphas. Unlike most high priests, Caiaphas was able to hold on to this position for 18 years. Now, let me put it in perspective. Most high priests serve for about 3 or 4 years. But Caiaphas was able to hold on to this position for 18 years because of his negotiating ability and because of his incredible influence and power. And here's what you need to know as we get into this story. He was committed to staying in power, regardless of what it cost him. But he met his match in a Jewish carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus. And if you've ever read the Gospels, you know that when Jesus went public with his ministry, he began to teach the people, and he began to feed the multitudes, and he began to heal the people. And what's interesting is this. If you've ever read it, maybe you've noticed it. Every time Jesus would heal someone, this is what he would say to them. Go and show yourself to the Pharisees. Go show yourself to the Pharisees. So Caiaphas would be, in his palace, having breakfast with his wife, probably bagels and lots, okay? And there would be a knock at his door. And he would go to the door, and on his front porch would be someone standing there who had been healed by Jesus. Maybe it was someone who was blind, but now he can see. Maybe that morning when he got up and woke up, he was lame, but he met Jesus during the day, and now he can walk. Maybe it's someone who had leprosy, and now they've been cured. And so he would stand there. And the reason that Jesus sent these individuals to the Pharisees, because it was their job to identify for the people who the Messiah was. And that means it was their job to investigate Jesus and then make the determination, is this guy really the Messiah? Now, let me tell you why this is significant. Edersheim, a historian, tells us that while Jesus was on the earth claiming to be the Messiah, there were 6 other individuals wandering around Judea also claiming to be the Messiah. And so this was not an unusual occurrence. It was the Pharisees determined to say he is the Messiah or he's not the Messiah. So think about this. Every day Caiaphas and his cohorts were reminded that there was a man named Jesus on the loose claiming to be the Messiah. But as Jesus' followers continued to grow and as his influence continued to increase over the people, Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin, this supreme court of the Jews, they began to feel their power and their influence eroding. And so they went into the mode to do everything they could to quiet Jesus. They tried everything they could to begin to discredit Jesus. But one day, Jesus performed a miracle that no one could ignore, and it changed everything. And it forced Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin to consider taking actions that I am 100% convinced they never thought that they would consider. By the way, let me just say this about the Sanhedrin. Their problem with Jesus wasn't his theology, although that's what they claimed. Their problem with Jesus wasn't his ancestry, although that's what they claimed. Their problem with Jesus was this. If he continued to do what he was doing, they were going to lose what they valued the most. They were going to lose their power. They were going to lose their position. They were going to lose their influence. And that's what they didn't want to lose. So they did, I think, what all of us do and what we've worked so hard to accomplish begins to slip away. They resorted to the only way they knew to possibly maintain control, and it was to leverage their influence, their power, and their position for their own selfish ambition. I don't know if you brought a Bible or not. Obviously, we'll put the verses up on the screen. John chapter 11. Your Bible may open there automatically because that's where Benji taught from last week, and he did just a phenomenal job teaching about Lazarus. But when you get to John chapter 11, as you saw last week if you were here, Jesus pulled off the ultimate miracle. He raised Lazarus from the dead. And Benji, thank you for teaching that last weekend. Now understand, up until this point, Jesus has preached a lot of messages. Up until this point, he's healed a lot of people. But when he went to Bethany that day to the house of Martha and Mary, he crossed the line. And I think Jesus did more than anyone ever imagined that he was going to do. He raised Lazarus from the dead. And so he stood outside the tomb of a man who had been dead for 4 days. 4 days. And he said, Lazarus, come out. And if you know the story, you know that Lazarus came out. And when that happened, remember there were a lot of people, we'll see in verse 45, that had shown up in Bethany. That's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. They had shown up there to support Mary, to support Martha, to go through the mourning process with them. A lot of them were skeptics at this point about Jesus and who he was, if he was the Messiah or not. But when it happened, a lot of skeptics said, you know what? We believe. We believe. We don't care what the Pharisees have to say about Jesus. We stood outside the tomb with Jesus, and we saw him call Lazarus out, and he came out after he'd been dead for 4 days. We saw it with our own eyes. We're with Jesus. We want to be on his team, okay? Forget the Pharisees. And you can only imagine that word of what happened in Bethany, now it's begun to spread like wildfire. So when you get to John chapter 11, verse 45, it says this, therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Can you just imagine them showing up to the Pharisees and say, dudes, we got bad news. You think feeding the multitude was impressive? You think healing a few people was impressive? He just raised somebody from the dead. And it says, then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. In other words, they're thinking this, as we're trying to deal with Jesus, this isn't going the way we thought it was going to go. We have done everything we can to figure out a way to shut this guy down, and nothing is working. Everything has failed. We've asked him every hard question we can think of, but he always has an answer. We've put him into every impossible situation we could imagine, thinking he could never get out of the situation. He always got out of the situation. We even tried the whole tax things. Do you pay honor to Caesar, or do you pay honor and tribute to God? That didn't work either. We're not getting anywhere with this guy. Now we hear this and we think, well, wait a second. Why didn't they just go with it? I mean, it is their job to determine whether or not Jesus is the real Messiah. Why didn't they just go with it? Why didn't they come to the conclusion, well, wait a second. He just raised somebody from the dead who had been dead for 4 days. You know what? Light came on. Think this is the Messiah. Why didn't they just come to that conclusion? Well, it's because there was something in them when everything in their world began to be threatened. When everything that they had worked so hard to build began to be tampered with, suddenly, instead of just being able to go with it, they went into damage control mode. And they began to consider things, as I said, I am sure they never thought that they would consider to control the outcome. In fact, you see in verse 47, here is this man performing many signs. Now notice this phrase, if we let him go on like this. That is probably the most arrogant statement in the entire New Testament. As if they were allowing Jesus to do everything he was doing. He was only doing what he was doing because they were permitting it and allowing it to happen. If we allow him to go on like this. In other words, these people, because of their wealth, because of their power, because of their status, they had actually convinced themselves that they were in control, that they could control this situation. Verse 48, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Now, this is where this story begins to intersect with our lives. And maybe you didn't know this, so I'll just let you in on a secret. If you're a Christian, at some point, following Jesus is going to cost you something. At some point on your journey with Jesus, something is going to come along and it's going to rock your world. It's going to rock your faith. It may have to do with your health. It may have to do with your finances. It may have to do with a relationship. Maybe it's a business that you built from the ground up. But something's going to come along, and it's going to challenge your faith. And it's going to seem from your perspective, everything I've built, everything I've worked for is beginning to slip away. And when you get to that moment in your life, you will have to decide, am I going to trust Jesus in this situation? Or am I going to go into damage control mode? Am I going to compromise my morality? Am I going to compromise my integrity in order to protect what I have worked so hard to obtain? That's the situation these guys are in. And notice how they responded in verse 48. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then, again, this is what they feared the most. Everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Now, don't forget that phrase. We're going to come back to it. In other words, we got to stop Jesus. We got to put a halt to this, because if he continues to do what he's doing, we got a lot to lose. We could lose our wealth. We could lose our power. We may have to sell our big homes. We're going to lose our status in the community. So what are we going to do? Verse 49, then one of them named Caiaphas. Okay, there's our guy. Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up, you know nothing at all. In other words, you guys are idiots. You're idiots. You're acting like a bunch of idiots. Don't you understand the power we hold? Have you forgotten who we are? We are the all-powerful Sanhedrin. We're the Supreme Court of the Jews. Have you forgotten who I am? I'm the high priest of the Jews. I'm the one person on the planet that gets to go into the presence of God once a year. Have you forgotten all of this? We have all kinds of leverage, all kinds of opportunities to protect what's ours. And so it says in verse 50, you do not realize that it is better for you. By the way, you could make it say us, because Caiaphas is including himself. You do not realize that it is better for you, not the nation, not the people, for you, that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. And I think that when the Sanhedrin, which was made up of 70 men, I believe that when they heard the word die, I think there was a hush that came over the Sanhedrin. I think you could probably hear a pin drop. I think at this point they were probably like, Caiaphas, whoa, wait a second. You would go so far as to actually have an innocent man killed in order to protect what we've built, what we've obtained. To which Caiaphas responded, of course I would. What other choice do we have? Do you really want to lose everything because a carpenter from all places, Nazareth? Don't you know that nothing good ever comes out of Nazareth? Do you want to lose everything to this guy? To which they must have responded, well, I guess not when you put it that way. And so it says in verse 53, from that day on, they plotted to take his life. And if you know the story, eventually they had Jesus arrested on trumped-up charges. They convinced Pilate to crucify him so they wouldn't lose what they had worked so hard to obtain. And you hear the story and you think, man, these are some evil dudes, right? I mean, this is like the Jewish mafia, right? But here's the principle. And maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're not a Christian this morning, but this principle, it applies to all of us, whether you're a Christian or not. When we get to the place in our lives where we begin to believe, I am who I am because of me. Or we get to the place where we begin to believe, I've gotten to where I am in life because of me, then along with that assumption comes the pressure to maintain it on our own. I got me here. I got to keep me here. And I got to tell you, that pressure has the potential to drive us all to some incredibly unhealthy extremes. And that's why we'll turn on the news sometimes and some story will come out about an individual who sacrificed their reputation, sacrificed their integrity. I mean, there's some kind of congressional investigation going on, sacrificed their morals to say what they feel is rightfully yours. At that point, since they built it on their own, they have no other choice. But do you know what happens when we think that way? We end up at odds with God when we need him the most. When we find ourselves in a situation like that, we find ourselves in a wrestling match with God. By the way, it's a wrestling match that no one has ever won. And in the end, we underscore what God was trying to tell us all along. We don't control outcomes. At the end of the day, we don't really control anything. In our lives, as followers of Jesus Christ, God is in control. And so we're left to accept, like Job, you know what? The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. So I want to give you a principle, and I want us to think about this principle as we walk out of here this weekend, and it's this one. I will not abandon the principles of God in order to try and maintain the blessings of God. Now, I'll be honest with you. I've broken that principle. And I've reaped the consequences of that. But can you imagine how differently our lives would be if we got to the place where we realize, I will not abandon the principles of God in order to try and maintain the blessings of God? For example, I believe that God gave me this relationship, or I believe that God gave me this business, or I believe that God gave me this opportunity. And because I believe that, even when I feel like it's all slipping away, I will not abandon the principles of God to try and maintain the blessings of God. I will believe sometimes God gives, and sometimes God takes away. And at the end of the day, I will not find myself at odds with God, on the wrong side of the fence with God, even if I lose everything. Because even if I lose everything, then that must be God's plan for my life. Now imagine if you could take that perspective into every arena of life. For example, next time you have a business deal, what if you went into that business deal, you know what? I'm going to work this deal as hard as I can. I'm going to do this deal to the best of my ability, and if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But I'm not going to wake up tomorrow at odds with God. Or I've done everything I can to save this relationship with the person I'm dating, but I'm not going to go to unhealthy extremes to make it happen. I'm not going to sacrifice my values just to hang on to this person, because my goal is to wake up every morning at peace with God. And if it works out, great. But at the end of the day, my number one responsibility is to God, and I'm not responsible for the outcome. That's God's job. By the way, you know what the ultimate irony is in the story of Caiaphas? He hated Jesus so much that he actually sacrificed everything he believed religiously to get rid of him. I mean, just think of the 10 Commandments. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. What did he do? Trumped up some charges. Don't murder. What's he do? He makes sure that Jesus gets nailed to the cross. In other words, he broke all of his own laws to make sure he protected himself. And do you know what happened at the end of the story? A few years later, the Romans, to squash this growth, this rebellion that was going on, swept in under a general named Titus, and they took away Caiaphas' status. And there wasn't a thing in the world he could do about it. Not only that, remember what he said, we'll lose our nation, we'll lose our temple? Not only that, they destroyed the temple. And not only did they destroy the temple, they made sure that it could never be rebuilt. Jesus predicted not one stone will be left upon another. All of you are going to go to Israel with me one day. Some of you gone. The Matthews have been. I see Big Jerry and Evelina. They've been with me. When you go to Israel, you'll go to the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is nothing but a big, huge platform that the actual temple was built on. The Temple Mount is still standing. You can actually walk and take tours under it today. But in some places, as you stand at ground level, the Temple Mount is 60, 70, 80 feet high. And it was on that platform, that mount, that they built the temple. And when the Romans destroyed the temple, they took every stone that was built in that temple and they pushed it off of the Temple Mount and they crashed on the ground below. And they still are sitting there to this day. They made sure not only that the temple was going to be destroyed, they made sure that it was never be built again. So think about this. In Caiaphas' attempt to stop the will of God, he was actually instrumental in accomplishing the will of God. And I say that because think about this. When Jesus died on the cross, there was no longer any need for any temple sacrifices. When Jesus died on the cross, he was the ultimate sacrifice once and for all. So Caiaphas, in his attempt to control and protect, literally put himself out of business by sacrificing the Lamb of God who came to take away the sins of the world. And his legacy ended up being the opposite of what he tried to accomplish, just as our legacy will be. If God has a plan for your life, it's not going to be stopped. You can resist it all you want to, but I'm telling you, resistance is futile. Now, what's the good news? We need some good news. What's the good news? Well, guess what? That means you didn't make yourself who you are. Pat yourself on the back, you know? That means you didn't get to where you are. Listen, most of us aren't that smart. You ever seen people that are super billionaires? They're not that smart. Some of them can't even find two socks that match. But you know what? Through the providence of God, they just ended up in the right place at the right time one day, and they're reaping the benefits of it. So you didn't make yourself who you are. You didn't get to where you are in life on your own efforts. So you're not responsible for maintaining your place and position in the world. You know what our responsibility is? And boy, if we could just learn this. Our responsibility is to be able to go to bed every night and say, if I win, I win. If I lose, I win. Because my responsibility is to be obedient to God and to trust him with the outcome. So here's the question I have to leave you with this weekend. Where in your life are you sacrificing what you know is right in order to try and control the outcome? Just think about that. It could be in your job. It could be in your finances. It could be in a relationship. But where in your life are you sacrificing what you know is right in order to try and control the outcome? By the way, just think about this. When you do that, do you realize what you're saying? You're saying, God, I am in this situation, and I would like to bring you into this situation. God, but this situation is just too big for you. Now, I know you created the stars, the moon, and the sun. I get that. I know you created over 900,000 different kinds of insects. I know that you alone created just 600 different kinds of beetles. I know that you're so magnificent that no two snowflakes are alike, right? But God, you can't handle this. This is way too big for you. And right now, some of you are thinking, I would never say that. Well, we do it every time we decide, I can't leave this up to God. We do it every time in our lives where we say, I just can't trust God with this situation. I've got to take the reins because if I don't, it's just not going to happen. But when we do that, we end up discovering what Caiaphas discovered. We just don't control the future. God does. We don't control outcomes. God does. And our job, our responsibility is to simply wake up every day and to the best of our ability, just be obedient to God. Because think about this. We don't want to wake up one day at odds with God over a situation that we don't control anyway. You ever thought about it that way? We really don't control it anyway. If we wake up with breath in our lungs and a heart that's beating, it's because God made the decision to allow us to live another day. So we don't want to be at odds with God over things we can't even control. And so we have to get to the point where we have the if I win, I win. If I lose, I win. Because my responsibility to be obedient to God is to be obedient and to trust him with the outcome. So let me just leave you with that question this morning. Where in your life, and you'll have to do a little inventory here, where in your life are you sacrificing what you know is right in order to try to manipulate and control the outcome? Father, thank you for being with us today. And Father, help us just to look into our lives and say, God, is there areas of life where I'm cutting corners? I'm doing things I typically wouldn't do. Maybe I've never thought I would do. Maybe it's happened so slowly we don't even realize we do, because we feel like somehow we can control outcomes and control your plan for our lives. And Father, those areas where maybe we're getting very, very close to coloring outside the lines, may we identify them. And as we'll see next week in the life of Judas, avoid the consequences of going against your plan, your will for our lives. And just speak in our hearts. And I know that you will through your Spirit. In your name we pray. Amen.